We welcome Dr. Eric Garland today to have a conversation with Frank LIDDY from Mindfulness Belfast. It really is a delight for me to have you here, Eric, and I'm quite anxious for you and Frank to have a conversation.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, everybody. And a big welcome to Eric. Hi, Eric. You hear me
Good
okay,
to see
Eric?
you again, Frank.
Good to see you too. And I was talking to our mutual friend the other night, looking for a few questions. Our good friend, Neil Abel. Anyway, Eric, what I'd like to do this evening would be, we could start off with a 3-minute breather, because the friendly circle group believes that less is more. So I'd like to begin with a 3-minute breather, and we'll talk for, like, say, 30, 35, 40 minutes. Yep. And then maybe then you could end with a 3-minute breather. That'd be fantastic. Okay. So to begin with, everybody, I'm going to invite the bell to sound, and then I'll sound the bell again in 3 minutes' time. Begin by noticing where your attention is right now. Is there a story, an expectation, planning, remembering? Now gently give yourself permission to shift from doing to being, to be present in your body, noticing contact with the floor, your left foot on the floor, your right foot on the floor. Notice contact with your seat. Notice how your seat supports your body. Back upright, not too tight, not too loose. Head upright, as though you're balancing a book on the crown of your head. And as you begin to settle into your body softens, lengthens. Now gently, with kindness and compassion, shine your attention like the beam of a torch on your breath, and allow your breath to take center stage. And as you breathe in, track your in-breath as you breathe in, exhaling, letting go on the out-breath as you breathe out. Your breath is always present, not a future breath, nor a past breath. Being present to this breath. Like a wave rolling on to the shore and gently returning to the ocean. Be present to the ebb and flow of your breath. When breathing, just breathe. The birds they sang at the break of day. Start again, I heard them say. Don't hold on to yesterday or what is yet to be. Ring the bell that rings. Forget your perfect offering. there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. A good stretch, a good yawn, a good scream, a good yell, a good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are on the planet. So, Eric, great to see you. You're looking fantastic. So, Eric, let's begin at the beginning. What was it like as a young Eric growing up?
Oh, that's an interesting question. What was it like as a young Eric growing up? That's a pretty general question. I would say as a young boy, I was a pretty happy kid and sort of I did a lot of daydreaming, a lot of creative pursuits. And I think I always, even as a young kid, I always had a bent towards, for lack of a better term, the mystical. So I can remember being really little, and my parents had a pool, and so I would sink down to the bottom of the pool, and I would look up at the water, the surface of the water, and I would look at the sunlight shining on the surface of the water while being at the bottom of the pool, holding my breath. And I think in those moments, I probably experienced my first moments of what I now call self-transcendence. This experience where your normal sense of self becomes very quiet or even disappears, and you feel this sense of being connected to something greater than yourself. And so I think I always had a bent towards those type of experiences, even from a young age.
So, Eric, tell me, how were you introduced to mindfulness practice?
I was introduced to mindfulness practice, formal mindfulness practice, in the very beginning of college. Actually, a friend taught me how to meditate. She was the first person who taught me, and I just immediately, I immediately took to it. It was very apparent that this was an incredibly important path, not only to cultivating psychological health, but also to connecting with my spirituality. And so I in college I was studying psychology at the time, but in parallel, I was doing a lot of reading of ancient Buddhist texts and Advaita Vedanta, Hinduism, and Taoism, and I really started to steep myself in Indian and Chinese and Tibetan philosophy, and that was really my rooting in mindfulness.
And then for myself, Eric, it was through our mutual friend, Neil Abel, who introduced me to your work, which has blown my mind. I can let everybody know that, and I recommend to follow up on your website and your readings as well. So for the listener, right, how would you describe M.O.R.E?
M.O.R.E is a therapy that I developed about somewhere around 2005, 2006, as a treatment for addiction, as well as its comorbidities, including chronic pain, so physical pain and emotional pain. So the depression, the anxiety, the trauma that often drives people to become addicted in the first place. And M.O.R.E really is based on not only on mindfulness and on the sort of the spiritual foundations behind mindfulness, but it's also founded on neuroscience. And I think that's particularly important because we've learned a lot in the past several decades about what happens in the brain when a person becomes addicted to drugs or alcohol. And so I really tried to take those learnings from neuroscience and then translate that into a therapy to help support people in recovery. So that's really what M.O.R.E is. It's sort of an integration of ancient wisdom and modern science. That's the way I like to think about it. And I can be more specific about the components of M.O.R.E if you're interested, Frank.
I'm sure we all are.
Okay. So there are three main components of M.O.R.E. These are, I call these the pillars of M.O.R.E. And the first is mindfulness training. And Frank just gave us a nice demonstration of that when we opened up our meeting today. So mindfulness is really the practice of cultivating attention, learning how to focus our mind, bring our minds into the present moment, to become aware of our experiences without trying to hold on to them or to push them away, but rather viewing our experiences almost as if we were a witness. And I think this witnessing aspect of mindfulness is incredibly important, actually, into its therapeutic power. So that's one of the pillars of M.O.R.E, but there are two other pillars of M.O.R.E. So the second pillar of M.O.R.E is reappraisal, which is the practice of reframing stressful events in life so as to see those events as an opportunity for learning or personal growth. So when we reappraise something, we come to realize that the tragedy or the difficulty that we're facing is actually making us stronger somehow. And then the third component of M.O.R.E, the third pillar of M.O.R.E is savoring. So savoring is really, I think, a particular application of mindfulness, which is focusing mindfulness on a pleasant everyday event, some sort of positive experience that's happening in the present moment. It could be the beauty of a sunset. It could be the smile on your friend's face. It could be the laughter of children playing outside. It could be the sound of birds singing in the tree. But turning attention towards that positive experience to really appreciate all the goodness that can be taken from that experience, and then really turning your attention inward and trying to absorb and amplify and allow those positive feelings to grow within you and to nourish you as a natural, healthy source of reward and joy and meaning in life. And so these three therapeutic pillars of M.O.R.E interact with each other. They form a synergy, so they strengthen each other, and ultimately, in some cases, lead to what you might call the fourth emergent force of M.O.R.E, the fourth emergent property of M.O.R.E, which is self-transcendence, this sense of being connected to something greater than the self, which I know is just a critically important piece of 12-step fellowships around the world, connecting with a higher power. And so I think that ultimately M.O.R.E also has a way to help facilitate that connection through these practices that I just described to you.
And when you mentioned savoring, which I love the very thought of that practice, can an individual through M.O.R.E savor the unsavory?
Great question. I mean, I think the short answer is yes, you can savor the unsavory. There's a long tradition of that. Actually, part of the philosophical basis for the savoring technique in M.O.R.E derives from ancient tantric practices that are more than 1,000 years old, from the Himalayas. And it was known to great thinkers of that period that it was possible to savor not only joy and beauty, but it was also possible to savor pain and sadness. And the example actually that was used in the classical philosophy that I'm referring to is going to a play, going to a performance, and watching a drama on the stage, and watching and noticing how the crowd becomes completely wrapped and immersed in the experience of watching the actors. And actually, people pay good money to go to theater to watch watch actors portray tragedies, tragic emotions of sorrow and rage and fear. And people find that actually entertaining. So you can savor the unsavory, as you say, because from that perspective, all experience, whether it's a pleasant event or whether it's a painful life event, all experience is really a reminder of being alive in this moment, of being. And you and Frank, you urged us to shift from doing into being. And so there's a beauty in being, no matter what you're facing.
Thank you, Eric. And Eric, you know, for the viewer and listener here, when it comes to mindfulness practice, for someone who doesn't know what mindfulness is, how would you describe mindfulness?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll describe this specifically with respect to the treatment of addiction, because I know that's why many folks are here. So I think of mindfulness as a form of mind training, as a form of strengthening the mind. And in particular, when we practice mindfulness, we're strengthening the control of our attention. We're strengthening our ability to regulate our emotions. So in a very real sense, what we're strengthening is we're strengthening self-control. We're strengthening the ability to choose what we want to focus on in life, to choose how we want to respond to the difficult situations in our life, to choose what we put into our body and what we don't put into our body. So I think mindfulness holds great power to support recovery, in that by practicing mindfulness, we're learning to become more self-aware. We start to become more aware of our habits, and we start to gain conscious control over our habits. And in addiction, as probably some people here have experienced, over time, what happens is we experience a loss of control over our substance use. And substance use starts to become more and more of an automatic habit, even to the point at which a person might really hate using drugs and alcohol and hate what it's doing to their life. And nonetheless, they feel unable to change it, powerless to change it, to use the language of 12-step. So in some degree, mindfulness training strengthens self-awareness and self-control over automatic habits. I think it's a way potentially of gaining some influence over this powerlessness.
Then for a $64,000 question, yep, and that is, where do you think addiction comes from? As in the origin?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one origin. I think there are multiple paths that lead to addiction. I think obviously people fall into the trap of addiction. Some people, just the very first time they use a substance, depending on the person's makeup, both their personality, their biology. Some people just get hooked instantly, and that's that. But actually, and that's really due to the interaction of the positively reinforcing pharmacological properties of the drug interacting with their genetic makeup and their learning history. But actually, that path, I think. Well, let me put it this way: I've been more interested in actually a different path leading into addiction, which is the path of self-medication. So the path of people turning to substances as a way to alleviate emotional pain. And that seems to be a particularly powerful way to get people trapped and ensnared in the cycle of addiction. Because of course, when you take the drug, there is the positively reinforcing pharmacological reward that the drug produces. But then there's this other type of reinforcement, this negative reinforcement that comes from when we're suffering and we take a drug and it temporarily alleviates our suffering, then that powerfully reinforces the habit of drug use. So in that case, it's really the double whammy. You're getting the positive reinforcement from the pharmacological effects of the drug, and you're getting the negative reinforcement from the temporary relief of suffering from taking the drug. But what happens as this cycle recurs, and this is actually, I'm glad we're talking about this, because this is important to understanding why M.O.R.E is a potentially important therapy for addiction. What happens is over time, as these cycles of reinforcement recur, there are changes that happen in the brain so that the brain starts to become more sensitive to stress, pain, and drug-related cues, and the brain starts to become less sensitive to natural, healthy pleasure. joy, and meaning. And so the person is in a hole. They feel empty inside. And then they're naturally trying to fill that emptiness and return to a sense of well-being. And the way they do that is they take higher and higher doses of the drug just to feel okay. But that's the downward spiral, right? It causes more and more of this. The person is digging themselves into a deeper and deeper hole as a result of these changes in the brain. And so they get stuck in the cycle of addiction. So what we're trying to do in M.O.R.E actually is to reverse this process. We teach people how to use mindfulness to savor natural, healthy pleasure, joy, and meaning in life. And in so doing, the hypothesis is this will then reduce how much they're being triggered and pulled by the drug, and then that will decrease their craving and their addictive behavior. And actually, that's what we found over 10 years of conducting research on this therapy, is that when patients go through M.O.R.E, their brains and their bodies become more sensitive to natural, healthy pleasure. And the more sensitive the brain becomes to natural, healthy pleasure, the less the person craves the drug, and the less addictive behavior they fall into. So that's really, I think, some of the most important. Those are some of the most important scientific discoveries of my career, and I think they point to a whole different way of approaching the treatment of addiction and supporting people in recovery.
And then, Eric, when it comes to M.O.R.E, and you're talking about the three pillars, almost like the three, legs of the three-legged stool.
Yeah.
I mean, does one have to incorporate the three, or can they use each one individually?
That's a good question. I mean, I think all three of these pillars are standalone. I think they're importantly therapeutic in their own right, but when they're brought together into a single approach to cultivating well-being, then I think it's particularly powerful. But I think if you just practiced mindfulness alone, for example, and you didn't really do reappraisal, or you didn't do savoring, I think it would still be a major support to your addiction recovery. But I think when you combine all three of these techniques, then you're really going to start to see some positive therapeutic change. And this isn't just me saying I think, but what I really should be saying is the data shows that this is the case. And so just so I know you, Frank, you're aware of this, but other viewers may not be. So I've conducted more than 12 randomized clinical trials of the M.O.R.E intervention, and these studies have involved more than 1,300 people with addictive disorders and addictive behaviors. So we've gotten a lot of data on this therapy. So the things that I'm saying, I'm not just pulling it out of my butt, but it actually has some basis in science.
And also for the listener and viewer as well, is that, you are probably one of the most, heavily researched, professors when it comes to looking at addictions. I think you've got the most papers out there at the moment. Is that right?
Not with addiction. That would be. Now you're complimenting me too much there, Frank.
Okay, I'll back off.
But no, I have published more papers on mindfulness than anybody else out there.
That's what it is. So then, putting mindfulness to the side for a moment, because personally speaking, from following your work and reading up on your work, I do believe that we need the three. Even as a Zen practitioner, and I do believe, as I said, like about the three legs of the stool, and they do complement each other, and they are interchangeable in any given day. But again, for the listener, maybe we move from the mindfulness to the second leg, which I think sometimes, would you call it like a positive psychology, or sorry, the second leg would be more like CBT type, would it be? Yes.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So the second leg of the stool are techniques that are really adapted from cognitive behavioral therapy. And these techniques really focus around teaching people how to challenge and change negative thinking patterns that cause them emotional distress and that can lead to relapse. So mindfulness alone is a really powerful way of dealing with negative thoughts, because we learn how to observe the negative thoughts and how they're affecting us. And then we learn how to step back from those thoughts, to not be so overtaken by them, and to start to recognize that thoughts are not facts, that we don't have to give in to them, we don't have to react to them. And that takes you pretty darn far, but it doesn't necessarily take you all the way, because so now you've recognized that your thought is not true, but humans are still thinking creatures. I mean, we live and move through thoughts like fish swim in water. So we've got to return to thought at some point. And the question is, what is a more helpful way of thinking about our life situation? So reappraisal is all about transforming our negative thoughts into more helpful ways of thinking about ourselves and our lives. And that really, I think that relates to actually an ancient Buddhist idea, which is the idea of transforming adversity into the path of enlightenment. So this idea, and it's also spoken of in this phrase, our enemies are our helpers. So when we see the challenges that arise in our life as opportunities to grow, to learn, to find meaning. And so we do that and more by teaching people how to really look at their thoughts and to analyze their thoughts logically, and to challenge negative thoughts, and then to try to come up with a different perspective on their life situation.
Usually, Eric, whenever I introduce myself, I normally introduce myself as, my name's Frank and I'm a recovering thinker. Yeah, because I do believe that's what it comes down to, sort of this, this addiction to thought. So moving on to the third leg, would the third leg be more along the lines of a positive psychology?
Yes. So the third leg is the positive psychology leg. This is the leg of the stool that's focused on savoring. And really, I think this is one of the key. Sorry, I got some guys in my house fixing my furnace. It's freezing cold in my house right now. So I may have to talk to him in a second here, but so the third leg is really, really critically important. This is, again, the idea that that we should keep our eyes open for the beauty in the world around us, and actually pay close attention to that, because it's critically important to leading a fulfilling life. And, this is quite a divergence from a lot of the existing therapies for addiction, which are really focused on removing the negative. So getting rid of cravings, avoiding triggers, decreasing negative emotions, reducing conflict, right? It's all removing things, taking things away. And some of those therapies, like CBT, for example, are really useful for doing that. They're good at doing that. But what about, it's not helping this problem, and recovery in general is not just about removing the negative. It's about cultivating the positive. It's about filling your life up. It's about reclaiming a sense of joy and purpose and meaning in life, and doing acts of service and compassion and helping others. And when you build a meaningful life like that, that's a really good bulwark against addiction. And I really think this is one of the critical pieces in addiction recovery. And I'm saying this not only as a psychotherapist who's worked with people in recovery for about 20 years, but also as an addiction scientist. And that is, as I described to you, over time, when the person falls into the cycle of addiction, the people, the activities, the values that they once cared about, those things become less important to that person as the drug starts to take on the primary importance. The thing that matters the most to the person is getting high or getting drunk or acquiring the drugs and the alcohol. And the person starts to give up really important parts of their life, seeking that out. So then if that's the case, then we need to basically reverse this process. We need to teach people how to reinvest a sense of meaning back into the people, the activities, and the values that they once cared about. And that will then decrease the pull of the drug and reduce the addictive behavior. So that's the concept. And that's why the third pillar of the stool, the savoring, is so important. In other words, we're basically teaching people how to make themselves feel good naturally on the inside, tapping into an inner wellspring of well-being.
And then I also like what you say, you know, so we've gone from the, you know, the first, second and third leg of the stool, right? And then maybe to be able to sit in that stool is the fourth part, which you refer to as the self-transcendence.
Yes.
Could you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the most, how do I put it? I think that's the most, well, I think it's the thing that underlies health and well-being. It's really the notion of recognizing our basic smallness as an egocentric individual, and recognizing that isn't really who we truly are, that who we think we truly are isn't really who we truly are, and that who we truly are is much, much greater than any thought or feeling or sensation. And this isn't really something to be talked about. This is more of an experience to be had. But I think many of us have had that experience. You know, for a lot of the examples I use, have you ever been at the concert of one of your favorite bands, and you're watching the musicians jam on stage, and you just get so captivated and so lost in the experience that all of a sudden you lose yourself and you feel that you're connected to something greater. And that feeling is often coupled with a powerful sense of bliss. Or maybe you've had the experience in nature. That's when I experience it myself quite often. You're walking in the mountains, or you're at the beach looking out over the ocean, and your mind becomes completely quiet, and you're no longer thinking about your past or your future, but you just have this sense of expansiveness going out to the horizon and beyond. You feel connected to all things around you, and maybe feel a love of the world. And these experiences also happen during meditation, mindfulness meditation. And in fact, that's a classical way of eliciting these experiences. And I think they're also the thing that's framed as quite central to the 12-step tradition as well. This connection to the higher power, coming through experiences like this, where we don't feel so isolated and alone, but we feel like we're a part of something greater. And what's important about this is that what we've shown from the scientific standpoint is that there are specific types of changes that occur in the brain when a person is having these types of self-transcendent experiences, and that the brain signature that is evoked by these experiences actually has anti-addictive effects. So we've shown this in 2 separate randomized controlled trials, that patients going through the M.O.R.E intervention, these were people, chronic opioid users, people who misused opioids, that as they went through the program, they were better able to experience these self-transcendent states when they practice mindfulness meditation. And the deeper the states of self-transcendence that they experienced, the more powerfully their brain started to emit this type of oscillation in the middle prefrontal brain regions called theta oscillations that you can measure on an EEG. And the stronger the theta brainwaves that were activated, the greater the reduction in their addictive behavior. So, and like I said, we showed this same effect in 2 different studies. So I think that suggests that we probably need to pay attention to these experiences as important for supporting recovery.
Tell us, Eric, we're coming to the end of you and me questions here, but Do you have a daily practice?
Yes, I do.
And can you say a bit more about the daily practice?
It's pretty simple. I mean, I've been practicing the same thing for 29 years and I still haven't mastered it yet. So, I sit down, I typically practice with my eyes closed, although sometimes with eyes open. I focus on my breath, similarly to how you showed us the beginning of this meeting. I do that for a little bit, let's say a couple of minutes, and then I turn my attention to the field of awareness, and I just rest awareness and awareness. And then sometimes when I'm lucky, when I rest awareness and awareness, there's really no difference between the inside or the outside.
Mm.
And there isn't really much of me there at all. It's just being, as you say. So then I rest in that for a while, and then I get distracted by some random thoughts, and I'm off to the races. And then eventually I catch myself, and I go back to the breath, and then I start again and rest awareness and awareness. But that I've been practicing for 29 years, so it wasn't always like that.
Whenever I asked a Zen teacher one time in San Francisco, he told me that he says, Frank, you've got two lives. And of course, being from Belfast, I wanted to know, when do I get my second life? And he told me you get your second life when you realize you've only one. Yep. I'm wondering, for the audience, do you have any saying or piece of wisdom that you could share before we move into Q&A?
This is not my saying. This is passed on to me, but this has been helpful to me recently, so I'll just pass it on to you, which is from a Zen master, and that is, always take the 1,000-year view.
Oh, very good, very good. So before we go into Q&A, could you lead us in a short breathing space?
Oh, sure. You want me to do this now? The 3 minutes?
Yes. Oh, yes, please.
Okay. All right. I don't have my bell with me, but I would invite you to allow your eyes to close, or they can remain open and relaxed on a spot in front of you. And turning your attention inward, noticing the sensation of the body, making contact with the chair. And we have this word, contact. But what is it really? Perhaps a sensation of warmth or heaviness or tingling or some other sensation. And then shifting the focus of the attention to the sensation of the breath, moving into the nostrils as you breathe in. Just noticing the natural sensation of the breath, its warmth or coolness. And if the mind wanders, that's okay. That's what minds do. They wander. Just noticing where the mind has wandered off to. Acknowledging and accepting that thought or feeling or distraction. And then returning the focus of the attention back to the breath. That's right. And then given our brief time, perhaps contemplating a curious question. Is the space inside the body and the space outside the body two or one space? Just resting awareness in that space now. And then when you know, each time that you practice this, it will become easier and easier to go even more deeply into mindfulness. You may feel a little more comfortable, a little more centered, and a little more encouraged when you complete this practice and allow your eyes to open.
Well, Eric, a big thank you for your time and a big thank you for your kindness.